Today I'm joined by Kelvin Giles. Kelvin is a strength and conditioning coach with 40 plus years of experience. Kelvin has coached multiple Olympic athletes, world champions, Olympic champions. Kelvin has filled multiple roles, which would be too much to outline them all. I linked them up on my website. Head of the Australian Institute of Sports for track and field, head of physical development, Brisbane Broncos, head of elite player development, Australian Rugby Union, and now a founder and owner of Movement Dynamics. Welcome, Kelvin.
Oh, thanks, Christian. Thank you.
Kelvin, it must be some time ago, but how did you get into strength and conditioning?
Well, what a strange way of starting a chat with you that I didn't get into strength and conditioning. I was trained as a PE teacher many years ago, and I entered into coaching as a track and field coach. That has been the closest thing to my heart for the last 50 years. And back in the days of the 60s and the 70s, when I was learning my trade and taking my first faltering steps into coaching athletics in the UK, I had to coach everything. I had to coach the technical, the tactical, the physical, and the behavioral. We had no choices then. There was just us as coaches, as opposed to now when you go into many high performance operations and you see an army of specialists. We, back in those days, had to be the best generalists that we could be because we had to handle it all. And as important, if not more important than most parts, not just the technical and the tactical and the physical, but we were part of the behavioral development of these young people as well. So the strength and conditioning, it's 30 or 40 years into my career when I began to meet players from the Canberra Raiders when I was working in Canberra at the Institute of Sport there as a track and field coach. I met other sports people and I managed to help them in a more strength and conditioning way of things than in the technical things because it was a sports I wasn't used to. So even now when I've spent a lot of time in strength and conditioning in recent years, everything keeps coming back to the central point that I'm a track and field coach. And I'm hoping it's helped me a little bit. The fact that I can see the role of the physical development of the athlete in the context of the technical and tactical journey they're on. And therein lies I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to have so many specialists nowadays when the key is how do we apply all these elements of performance to the athlete themselves and not become over-specialized. And I see that quite a lot nowadays, that we're getting specialists specializing now, and it's getting even worse. I've been down to a local football club recently that I've been consulting with, and there is an army of specialists there, all working in their own silo. And therein lies the problem. I was lucky. I understood the physical development, or I was taught the physical development of an athlete, and I was taught how to apply it in the context of their overall performance journey, not to become a specialist. So I do spend a lot of time in strength and conditioning, but I spend most of my time, and my mind spends most of its time in the delivery to the sport specific. So, sorry, it's a strange way of answering your question, but I'm a track and field coach.
And then what you just said about the specialist, that's an interesting one because I've been to a conference recently and they outlined some research. It was more of a case study and they looked at successful teams around an athlete or successful athletes and the teams around. And it seems the trend is going backwards. So the conclusion was the power of small teams. So one coach and then a few people around the athlete rather than having great, as you said, support staff for everything.
Yeah, and yes, and the important argument of that is that if you only specialize, then you do have a very narrow view on things, and you can very often. And there's plenty of examples. Let me give you an example which is a little bit more obtuse than the direct question here. That let's look at the Institute of Sport in Canberra when it was in its heyday, in those the first 10 years of its existence, when all it had there were coaches, and it had a support mechanism of sports medicine and some sports science. And then as time went on, you found, and the first chief executive was Don Talbot, who had coached 100 Olympians in swimming. He understood coaching. And so all his administrative and his bureaucratic decision-making was with a coaching language and vocabulary. And then the specialists came along. And the next head of the operation and so on and so forth, the different people that came in to run the operation, you get a scientist. And now you find science has got the upper hand. Or then you had a sports medical practitioner take over the institute as the director. And so medicine gets the upper hand. One of these fundamental problems that you've got to be very wary of with these specialists is that they fight hard to dominate the environment. And they probably do it with a good heart. They're probably doing it because of their enthusiasm. But the minute you over-specialize and you don't see the entire operation and you're not flexible and adaptable in which is the priority you've got to have on any given moment, specialists very often have no other place to turn to. The generalists are the people that understand when and how to use the tools that are in your toolbox. And it's that part that we lost, I think, over several decades of when we had these very glamorous high performance units or academies or institutes, and they lost their way, and they've lost their way in Australia. And if you've noticed what's happening in Australian sport now, the Australian Institute in Sport in Canberra it's just a dead entity. It's not producing any more athletes. It's a centre for science. It's a centre for research. It's a centre for bureaucracy. And I don't think those things are needed when we're crying out at the coalface for better coach-athlete relationships. And governments are so easy to spend their money on the bureaucratic areas of things, it's killing sport. And so that's why I was thankful that I was brought up in a time when to be a generalist was a fine thing as opposed to a specialist.
I want to go a little bit off script here because I think it's really interesting to dig into all your experiences. What you just mentioned that, for example, if someone from the medicine field takes over, everything comes a bit of medical driven. From the science, it becomes science driven. I've been in different organizations around the world, and I saw a similar trend. Something I would like to know from your experience. Do you think in general that S&C is maybe not as strong as fighting for their spot as other disciplines are?
Strength and conditioning, fighting for their strength and conditioning. Let me just give you the experience that I had when I first understood strength and conditioning, because I understood how it behaved when I first saw strength and conditioning. I never had to try and appoint a strength and conditioning coach into my coaching operation because I was doing it myself. Now, I may not have been doing it very well, but at least I understood where the physical development fitted into the technical journey that the athletes were on. But in those early years of understanding strength and conditioning, we were stuck in the paradigm of Olympic weightlifting. And everything I read 40 years ago, 50 years ago, from all the research into strength and conditioning came out of, I think most of it came out of Edinburgh at the time. It was all about the second part of the pull in the clean. Every bit of research was about the second part of the pull in the clean. And it may have been my limitation. I wasn't reading enough. And since then, strength and conditioning has never thrown off the Olympic weightlifting paradigm that it's come from. And the reason I sound critical of that is that I was brought up on a physical education curriculum that was based on movement, that was based on the formal gymnastics the formal movements of formal gymnastics and the solving movement puzzles that came through educational gymnastics. That was the 1958 European PE curriculum. from which then, when you had formal and informal learning of movement patterns, in other words, you developed a movement vocabulary, and then from that, you use those tools inside specific games. And that was the way it used to be done when I was growing up, and then when I was being trained as a teacher, and when I was being trained as a coach. So to have this very narrow band of Olympic weightlifting representing the total picture of strength and conditioning was not helpful. And sometimes as well, when strength and conditioning zealots would come along, when they would be using that we've got to develop mental toughness by nearly crippling the athletes, by taking them beyond where they used to going. And the smart part of training, again, was lost with that kind of paradigm. We're beginning to see now that movement efficiency is beginning to play its role in the language and vocabulary of strength and conditioning. But remember, it's 50 years too late. So we have got a long way to go before strength and conditioning gets back to where it used to be, and that is the all-round general physical well-being of the athlete, the emotional well-being of the athlete, a huge movement vocabulary from which sport-specific things can grow. That was probably one of the most successful periods for that generation. And I think we are maybe slowly going back to that, and to try and cast off. I'm not castigating Olympic weightlifting, but it's only one tiny element and result of good movement efficiency is Olympic weightlifting. And I think once strength and conditioning can grow out of that and grow wider and grow into a more generalist approach to things, it could help itself. And just to add to that, the other trap that all sport has fallen into, and in strength and conditioning in particular, is the research paradigm that it's stuck in. We have more research people out there, more pseudo-scientists, and hardly any decent coaches. And the ability to how to coach as being lost in a sea of either Olympic weightlifting and all those paradigms and or research. And we don't need pseudo-scientists. We need good teachers and coaches.
Yeah. That fits perfectly with the question I've actually written down for later. But I've heard you speak multiple times live, but also in podcasts. And you talked about the importance of coaching, the art of coaching, what you just said as well. You also have been a director, head of performance, however you want to name it. So you sat on the other side of the table when employing people. How
Yes.
can you gauge if someone is a good coach if you only have a CV in front of you? Because we see the trend of people up having masters, PhDs, and all these kind of things, but it doesn't say anything about the coaching side. But if you sit in an interview, how do you gauge that?
Well, I have to guess like everybody else if I only sit in an interview. But in recent years, and I've had the honor of placing people in positions all around the world, I have, in the last, say, 30 years, have spent more time going to watch the people who might want to apply for the position. I go and watch them teach, and I go and watch them coach. And we were doing something in Scotland a few years ago with Phil Morland that now is looking after the New South Wales Institute of Sport Strength and Conditioning Programme. When he was looking after the Scottish Institute Strength and Conditioning Programme, I think he scared the pants off the people that turned up for an interview, because he said, oh, by the way, we've got 6 athletes waiting for you next door. I know you're in a suit and you're looking very fine today, but I want you to go next door and coach them in a warm-up. And you just watch some of these applicants freeze. So there are times nowadays where we've got to go beyond the CV. We've got to go beyond, and you've got to, it starts with the unmeasurable quality of presence. When somebody walks in a room, and when you meet somebody, they will have a presence with them. The way they look at you and they hold themselves, and the way that their dialogue, the way they meet you, the first words they use, that gives you a pretty good picture to start with of this human being in front of you. But then you've got to look deeply into how do they teach? How do they coach? How do they resolve a problem that they found? What happens when things go wrong? Now, all these things are the critical key. Now, but I've had to suck it and see like anybody else. I met Lachlan Penfold is a great friend of mine. He's worked all around the world in the very best areas, just one of the A team around the world. He's currently down with the Melbourne Storm at the moment. Now, when I first met him as a 21-year-old, I did take the first impression of what he was saying and how he was saying it and how he presented himself to me. And so I said, okay, look, let's give you a 6-week chance working with the under 19s here at the Brisbane Broncos. I'll give you come and work with us. And so I could then see him in this temporary environment before I moved him on to the first class position that he finished up going into. So I guess the recommendation is you can't go on a CV. You've really got to see this person teaching and coaching, and you've got to see these people when it's going wrong. That's the true test. And I think you've also got to see them. I'd like to know that a good coach can coach a 28-year-old Olympic finalist as well as coach a 12-year-old. There's your test. Seriously, that is your test. If you want to coach, you go and coach a 12 and 13-year-old and see how you go, because that will test you out. That your masters is not going to help you. Your ability to communicate and create a relationship in a second-to-second basis is going to be all you're going to have to do, and that is the key to anything else. I think we can always teach people the knowledge, the advanced knowledge that we have of load progression, load regression, exercise prescription, the management of the program through different cycles. We can teach that. But what you can't teach is that wonderful innate ability to create a relationship with the athlete in front of you. And we've got to be better than we are nowadays in the way we appoint people to positions like that. So I haven't found all the answers to the appointments. I only appoint those people that I know at the moment around town. There must be some wonderful, talented people out there that I can't recommend because I've never met them. That's one of the other lessons I've learned, is that I've got to know the person that I'm going to deal with at the moment. And I've got this A team of people that I turn to every single day. It's an interesting journey I've been on, that meeting these young people when they were in their early 20s and they were as green as I was when I was in my 20s, and now seeing them 30 years later as the world leading practitioners. I learn every day from them now. The whole thing's reversed. I don't think I taught them very much. I just gave them a bit of a chance and had a chat with them. But now I watch Suki Hobson at the Milwaukee Bucks. I watch Scotty Dickinson with Australian swimming. I watch Dean Benton with the Australian Rugby Union. I watch Lachlan down working with the Melbourne Storm. You just learn so much from these people as time has gone on. So, sorry, I've just gone off on a tangent there. That I think what I'm trying to say is it goes full circle from being the mentor and the boss. I'm now watching the great things done from these people that I trusted because they had this presence whenever you walked into a room. And there's another dozen of them around the world doing great things at the moment. So what can we take from my stupid rambling at the moment is that people making appointments in any part of human relationships, please look beyond the CV and look at the human relationship ability of this person to make a difference.
Really cool. You have been in strength and conditioning, physical preparation, track and field for 4 decades or more. And if you look back, there have been some trends coming into the field and leaving the field. What have been, in your experience, what have been fads and what have been things that stood and make the industry or the profession better?
Well, we've all suffered from the spells, potions, gadgets, and gurus. That's happened, and me and my colleagues lived through the transverse abdominis journey that everybody was taken on. You've got to draw in the lower abdomen before doing anything, and I don't know where that came from. The people that tried to sell it to me in the early 90s are now running away saying it was nothing to do with them. We didn't mean it. So there are all sorts of fads come along. The big one nowadays is technology, of where we try and get information back. There's really not much education on how to use the numbers, but there's lots of education on getting the numbers. So I think there's always going to be a trend come along, and in particular because the way we communicate with each other nowadays is that there is no, you're going to need a really good bullshit monitor if you just look at the internet, because if you read the internet or you watch a video clip on social media, the trap is that you might think that could work for your athlete automatically. So I think if you're looking at the different trends that have gone on, and I've seen the trends of the bumper style periodization, where you create a work of art and writing down an entire annual program. When I was going through that and trying to fill it in with every single detail for the preparation phase, the prep 2 phase, the pre-competitive phase, the competition 1 phase, and then go through for the second part of the year when you had to come up to the middle of the year type of peak, and tapering ideas and all these things. I was into that. We all were into that. And now I've got to the point where I've realized that I better write all this stuff down in pencil, because I can't write down next week's program. It's one of the things I've learned. I think one of the questions you sent through to me is, what is your philosophy on coaching? Well, I can't tell you what my philosophy is. All I can tell you is some of the things that glue things together, which helps you with answer this question. So if I only write things in pencil now, because the program is how the athlete adapts to it, not what I've written down. I can't write down that next week I'm going to change the program from this to this because of that 10-day cycle has gone through. I've got to wait and say, well, did the athlete adapt to that? Well, if they didn't, well, I better do it again before they do adapt to it. And so it's that kind of learning and growing over 40 years where what appeared to be so right and so sensible to have this periodization type of idea. That's just one of the things that came along. And now here I am 50 years later saying, I don't write an annual program down. I can't do that. All I can tell you is when the competition starts, and if I'm with a football club, I say, we've got to start in August. That's when the soccer season starts. I've got that right. I've got 6 weeks. What am I going to do in this 6 weeks? I'm going to try this with this individual. I'm going to try this with this individual, because again, there's another one of the trends. I can't have one training program photocopied 20 times. It's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. So for me to write this periodized plan and put it up on the wall and make the coach think I'm a genius is absolutely fruitless. I've got to have the ability to individualize what's going on in front of me. That's one of these things that I've learned over the times. One of the fads that came along was the writing of programs, and now I've got to the point where I know what I need to write down a general plan, but I've got to have that flexibility and the adaptability. Let me give you an example. Had a speed session today with an athlete, and they came along, and while the warm-up was unfolding, they just didn't look right. They didn't talk right. They didn't behave right. Their demeanor was different. When we were doing some movement pattern preparation in the warm-up, the feet were hitting the ground really hard. And I'm looking at this person in front of me who had a bad day. Now, if I just turn to my program that I've written down, that is written in stone, say, well, you're doing this high-speed running mechanics session of flying 30s today, I've learned I've got to react to what's happening in front of me. And that athlete was not ready to go and do a high-speed running mechanics session. Straight away, I recognize it. Well, I wouldn't have recognized it 40 years ago. I'd have blindly followed this wonderful piece of paper I'd written down. Now I'm going to say, hang on a minute. If we go there, we're going to get hurt. It's not going to be productive. We're not going to progress. So we just stopped where it was. And I tried to then put together a session that would get the athlete to smile and feel better about themselves, from which they would grow. Now that is one of the biggest things I've learned. The fad was to write everything down and predict it, and now I no longer do that. I'm not sure if that's answered your question in any way, but the other point is this: the session only finishes when the athlete's recovered from it. And I can't. I mean, I do write. I know what I'm doing with this sprinter tomorrow. What should be that? But today changed, so I'm going to wait until I see what turns up tomorrow, and I can go in two ways. I can go back to speed tomorrow if they're in that position, or I might have to wait a little bit longer and go and do some other movement pattern work. I might take it back to, how about some starts? What about some relay exchanges? Is that something that could hide a little bit? Can I find another way of stimulating? If I can't get the speed, I'll leave it another day, because something has gone on with this athlete, and whether it was they never recovered from the previous session in time, I don't know. But those two things I've just told you is that I can only go on what happens in front of me, not what I've written on a piece of paper. And secondly, the session only finishes when the athlete's recovered from it. Those are two things that are completely different here I am in this 25 years of my career than where it was when I'm back in the first 25 years of my career, when I just did everything like I was told to do, and I made more mistakes than ever. Sorry, I'm going off. I ramble a lot.
No, it looks like we are completely aligned here with you leading up into the next question perfectly. What's the advice you would give a younger Kelvin if you could travel back in time?
The biggest mistake I made, if you look at this from from a big building blocks to little building blocks. Let's do a big building block of advice. One is that I should never have come to Australia in 1981. I was 32 years old. I thought I was better than I really was. I may have thought the grass is always greener. I was a national coach for Great Britain's athletics team at the time. And my ego must have been made to feel really good, because I was offered the position of the head of track and field at the Institute of Sport in Canberra. And I was working out of the Midlands in the United Kingdom at the time. And that stroked my ego a lot. And I was 32. Who in their right mind? I got no idea what I was doing at 32. I may have been a national coach entitled, but I should have stayed in my apprenticeship for the next decade. I should have gone into my early 40s before, and I learned my trade a lot more, to learn the rhythms of the sport a lot more. And I didn't. I let ego get the better of me, and I came to Australia, and it was very nice to start with. But it was, I never knew what questions to ask the Australians. They weren't ready for an Institute of Sport. They certainly weren't ready for a 32-year-old who thought he knew more than he did. And it was so you've got all the diplomatic problems that went on. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know, even with my limited experience. I was working in the major theatre of world athletics, Europe. And so I brought some of those things I'd learned into Australia, and I was 20 years ahead of my time on that one, because they weren't ready for it. And I didn't understand how to handle the political ambushes and the egos that were involved and how the sports were being run, because I was a kid. So that's my advice to myself. Don't do that again. Serve your apprenticeship under the guidance of people like Frank Dick and Wilf Page and Carl Johnson and Malcolm Arnold, who are the doyens of coaching in Europe, and learn from them for the next 10 years. That is something. There's so many things out there. There's so many trinkets to attract you and takes you out the zone of which you're going to be capable of handling. And that was my biggest problem. So that's a big picture. Serve your apprenticeship and don't make the mistake that I did. On a smaller scale, of things that have gone wrong that I've basically learnt from, because of the status of the athlete, their title. I'll give you the example. When I first got to the Brisbane Broncos in 1989, this was the cream of the crop. This was the best rugby league players in Queensland, and many of them the best in Australia. And my dumb assumption was that they were also physically and emotionally as good as their title, as good as their reputation, as good as their ranking. And so I started to. It's one of the things where we need to be fast. Speed is the key in field and court sports. And I started a program of speed development, and I nearly broke the entire team because I assumed that they were physically resilient and robust enough to tolerate the load of sprinting that was going to give them some adaptation. And I think I did 2 sessions of what I thought was decent speed work, and suddenly started getting all sorts of soreness and reactions to the speed that I wasn't ready for, because I assumed that because these were the best players, they were also physically and robustly ready to go and do the kind of work I wanted them to do. So I realized that I had to go back and build the athlete from the ground up, and I had to question all my assumptions. I did it with here. So now I'm 73 years old now, and 3 weeks ago I made the same dumb mistake, and I made it with a 12-year-old. This is a young person that's enjoying swimming at the moment, and we're just trying to give her all-round athletic development because she's not going to get it anywhere else. Physical education, somebody took the physical out of physical education 40 years ago and has never put it back in. And so we try and give her all-round athletic development. And she was doing a push-up routine, and she does lots of variety in the push-ups. She does push-ups wide and narrow and offset hands and all sorts of things. And she did this wonderful push-up routine over the weekend. She set best in the numbers she could do and the range she could go through. It was really good. And that was a Saturday. On Monday, and there had never been a reaction to it before. On Monday, she got a high explosive swim session going on, and she hurt her chest on the Monday because I just blindly thought, wow, there's a new breakthrough in her pushing ability. She's now looking very strong in pushing, multi-directional, multi-joint, multi-plane pushing she was doing, and I didn't give her long enough recovery, and she got hurt on the Monday. I hurt a 12-year-old because I didn't question my assumption and say, okay, first of all, maybe the 48 hours wasn't good enough, but I should have questioned that. The minute somebody breaks through and sets a new standard of whatever it is, whether it's direction or force or complexity or speed, in ever the movement they're doing, then you got to say, okay, that's a new level. Let's make sure they've recovered from it. If I'd have left it one more day, we wouldn't have got hurt. And I hurt a 12-year-old because I was too dumb to link an improved performance that's going to take a lot longer to recover from. Can you imagine that? 73 and stuffing up a 12-year-old. Ridiculous. Because that trap is there waiting for all of us. That understanding what coaching and teaching is, and those philosophies of they've only finished the session when they've recovered from it. And so I guess that question, that point is, you've got to question your assumptions all the time. If you don't question your assumptions, you'll do the dumb things that I've done.
That's a really good point. I would like to go back to the other point you mentioned about the apprenticeship, and you should serve your time in the apprenticeship. A lot of the people that are listening or reading what I'm distributing are young aspiring coaches. When do you know that the apprenticeship is over? When you are in there?
Well, the glib answer is your apprenticeship is never over. You're just going to make less mistakes as you get older.
When do you know to take a position or better stay in the place where you are?
Look, I don't think there's a one. That was an example of when it was too young for me to make that, to take that decision. For somebody else who's 32, they may have a different demeanor and background to them that they might be able to take it on. I think all you can say on that is you are not, nobody's going to post a letter to you to say you're ready. You've just got to, again, let me use the same phrase. You've got to question your assumptions. It's no use me trying to influence people based on my background, because my background is completely different. I did my first 10 years of coaching without being paid. I coached because I wanted to coach. I used to get my money as a PE teacher during the day, and then I coached 7 days a week in the local athletics clubs in Birmingham in England. And I just turned up and I volunteered. And I'm now a volunteer. Then I became a professional coach for many, many years. And now I'm back being a volunteer coach again. So at the moment, we do find a lot of people coming out, they've got their degree, their first degree in human movement studies, or then they move on to a master's, and they maybe even go into a PhD. And I've only ever appointed one PhD in my time. That was Anthony Georgie at the Queensland Academy of Sport, because he was a guy that did his PhD while he was coaching. There's too many guys out there do their PhDs and they haven't seen sunlight for 15 years, let alone coached. So I need people that have been going out there and coaching. So that point about when is it time, I would just be, all I can say is be cautious on chasing the money. If you chase the money, it could be a very small time that you're involved in this sport. I think you've got to chase the experience first. And it's hard to say when you're out and you haven't got a job. Unfortunately, many of the universities nowadays that offer human movement degree courses and all the related things through masters and PhDs, they never tell the students that, oh, by the way, there's no jobs out there for you. And you find people coming out who are great exercise physiologists that can't get a job, great biomechanists that can't get a job. The people that do get the jobs are those who've got those wonderful skills of teaching and coaching. Yet the universities have drifted further and further away from that and are producing pseudo-scientists and not coaches. So it is a matter of telling yourself the truth, of being brave enough to take on and to climb up a mountain, be brave enough to make mistakes and learn from them. So I can't say the exact date that you should now say your apprenticeship is over. I think one of the smart thing is to say, hey, I'm always going to be learning this. I learned stuff last week. I've only got to get in a chat with Wayne Goldsmith or whoever I want to speak with about a swimming issue or a running issue, and I can talk to anybody in the sprint mechanics world and learn something from them. And my apprentice, therefore, is still going on. So I think my experiences are not for everybody, apart from that glib statement of serve your apprenticeship first before you decide to try and grab onto something. If you make a mistake, one of the things when I went to the Institute of Sport, I don't think I made too many mistakes with the athletes at the time, because we did get the performances moving forward quite well. But in terms of being the head of a department, to make the department healthy politically, healthy bureaucratically, to give it a future, I really had no idea of doing that. All I could do was teach and coach. So I wasn't ready for that kind of position. So don't let your ego write checks that you can't deliver. That was my advice on that one.
You've partly touched on that, but then what's the advice to young aspiring S&C coaches? What should they do first?
Oh, learn how to teach, learn how to coach, learn to read the athlete in front of you. Don't just read it's not just, if it was just about reps and sets, a donkey could do it. Reps and sets and load progression and load regression and all those things are, I think, put at the center of your universe this. How does this person learn in front of me? How are they going to learn? And see if you could learn to be, as a coach, to be the master of the explicit to implicit learning continuum. Because if you could understand how the person learns in front of you and present a program that is forever rotating through all these learning experiences from the explicit, you do have to give them instruction. You do have to give them explicit instruction to start with. It reduces the number of errors they take when they first embark upon learning to squat, lunge, pull, push, brace, rotate, hinge, or landing. Certainly make sure they're safe and they've got an idea of what's happening. It's quite explicit. But we also know that a person will deliver their proficiency in a competitive environment, maybe, far better under pressure if they've learned this skill implicitly. That we've managed to not only give them an explicit start to their learning, but we've also set them some puzzles to solve. So how can you teach the squat in an explicit way to get them safe and get the general movement pattern going right, but then to sort of prepare them implicitly of solving triple flexion extension puzzles in a variety of ways, a variety of means, in a way. So look at the squat. If you're only going to Olympic weightlifting, it ain't hard. But if you're going to do triple flexion extension inside a netball game, boy, that's a bit different. Now I'm going to have to teach them this triple flexion extension in landing, in jumping, in twisting and turning. I'm going to have to do this by them solving puzzles. Why? Because the game's going to make them solve puzzles in triple flexion extension. So if you see that picture now, we start off at the simple, basic squat movement, which we see in Olympic weightlifting. We teach them that, and we teach them so they can do that movement well. And then we start exposing that movement to different puzzles, different variables come in, and it moves along the implicit learning. What do we mean by implicit learning? Let's make sure people understand that. You know, we give them puzzles to solve, or it's guided discovery. We shut up a lot more as coaches. We don't keep on talking. We set them a task and say, okay, now do it. Now I want you to do that with your eyes closed. Now I want you to do it with no arms. Now I want you to do that movement while you've got to catch and pass this ball to me. Now I want you to do this while you're moving. Now I want you to do it, and I want you to mirror your partner in front of you. I want you to do, and you give them some environments where they've got to solve the puzzle with hardly any pressure. And then you crank up the pressure. Now you've got to do it. When I drop this ball, you've got to do a squat, and then you've got to run over there and do another squat over. You begin to make this a puzzle solving way of them learning. They learn by not just, they learn it implicitly, which means looking at the outcome of the movement. You do it by looking at external focus instead of just. So all these things that we learn about from learning is the way you want to fill your toolbox up. So that's another thing that these. I think if you can start there, it doesn't matter whether you're running, jumping, throwing, kicking, catching, or striking. It doesn't matter whether you're squatting, lunging, pushing, pulling, bracing, rotating, or hinging, or landing. None of that matters. If you have learned to take them from the explicit to implicit learning continuum and involve them in that all the way through their learning, then you'll win. This is not just about GPS analysis. It's not about force time continuums. It's not about reactive strength index. All those are nice, sexy things to do. If you know how this person learns, and remember that person in front of you is going to learn a bit different to the person standing next to them. You might have a different language and a different vocabulary for two exact athletes in your. That's going to be where you'll make your biggest breakthroughs in understanding learning. If you understand learning, you'll understand teaching and coaching. And then tell you, it doesn't matter, like I said, without being too repetitive, whether you're running, jumping, throwing, kicking, catching, or striking, it doesn't make any difference. If you really are a master of the entire learning continuum, make that the center of your universe and you won't go far wrong.
And I think we're coming full circle with the question from before about trends, because it seems like in recent years there has been explicit learning, explicit learning, explicit learning. And I always think like if there's a very one-sided answer, only this and not that, then we should use our common sense a little bit more. Anyway, so thanks for that answer. You have founded Movement Dynamics, which is a consultancy that delivers world-class services of athletic development to young athletes as well as professional athletes. Where did this motivation come from?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think 2007, I think that Great Britain London had won the Olympic bid, and they then started to go around the world and get the best minds involved. And Australia had already had its, it had got 2000, it had had the 2000 Olympics. It had put the Institute of Sport together. It had found a way of punching above its weight. And a lot of Australian people went across to the UK, and I found myself going across there many times. And so I thought, well, maybe I could go and park myself in the UK, because going backwards and forwards, flying 12,000 miles was just killing me. And so I just got to the point, I finished at the Australian Rugby Union. That was coming to an end, that contract of helping their elite player development model forward. And I was beginning to get more and more invitations outside a permanent position. And I was enjoying them because I was meeting that many great people. And I just thought, well, it's time to go home. You know, it is time to go home. I was born in England. England's my home, and I've been in Australia for all these years. And I had that many invitations to go across and help with different sports or different coach athlete units. I thought, hey, go home. So I went and I went and lived at my sister's house in southern England, and just said, okay, and started accepting invitations. And it just so happened that it did help if I could do that through a company network. So I set up this company called Movement Dynamics that I'd played with in Australia, just to get a title, really. And because I'd been writing the book on physical competence assessment, and on an introduction to athlete development, and the physical competence assessment was something which I found was very important. In other words, build the athlete from the ground up, give them the physical competence to do the technical stuff, and do it in that order. Techniques often break down because they're not strong or stable enough to do the job. And so I was promoting that, and I just found it more easy to say, well, let's create a company name. It sounds posh. It was only me, and I could then operate through that company structure. I'm not sure if it worked or not. It's just a name. It was only me at the end of the day. So it was just me finding an avenue of how I could get around to many, and then I just moved through all sorts of places. You just go down like LTA down in Roehampton, and I met up with Narelle was down there, and the crew down there were great, and they listened to what I had to say and then just ran with it and just took it to different levels. And I think that's one of the great things of when you meet with people who are vibrant and want to break through and are willing to throw away all the old ideas they had and learn new things and be open-minded. There was the crew down at the LTA just ran with it and created a competence assessment for that. The same thing went for Scotland. The same thing went for the Irish people across in the Ireland Institute of Sport. Everywhere I went, and across into Holland with Scotty Dickinson in the Dutch Olympic Committee, and all those people, you sit and you discuss and you debate. I learn from them, and whether they learn from me, I don't know. But then you watch them just fly with this and take this to new levels. But always, regardless of their interpretation of this, always very sound they never moved off to the spells and the potions and the gadget stuff. It's as if they just wanted to make sure they could build this athlete from the ground up. And that's where the movement dynamics principles are at the end of the day. It's to get, one of the things I always say is, if your elite player development program is the same as your development program, one of them is wrong. And if we want, when I was at the Queensland Academy of Sport, the number of 15 or 16-year-olds that would come in who were ranked so high in their sports, and we were told that you've got 4 to 8 years to get them to the Olympic team, and we'd have to turn around and say, impossible, because they can't walk, talk and chew gum at the same time. They have not got an all-round, they might be a great golfer or a great netball player, but they haven't got the resilience, the capacity, the competence, technically, tactically, physically, and emotionally to go on this journey. We've got to build them from the ground up. And that's the biggest problem of where we are in sport today. It's all fast tracking and quick fixing. And we're arriving with those athletes in that transition period from teenage years and late teenage years into their early adulthood, with so many limitations technically, certainly host of limitations physically, and the worst of all is hosts and hosts of limitations behaviorally. Now that has got to be the key to all our coach education and our coach delivery, is allowing these people to go to the next stage of their journey with no limitations. And that's where the movement dynamic stuff came from. You know, we said, well, let's look at physical competence. If you can't squat, lunge, pull, push, brace, rotate, hinge, and land well, how on earth are you going to go into an extensive training program? And who's teaching this? PE? No. Coach education at level 1? No. So it's not being taught anywhere. So that's where I started doing that stuff. And then all you guys have taken it on and taken it to great levels. So that's the movement dynamics situation, if it means anything.
No, to add to this, I mean, I've read the handbook. We are using some of the tests, and I think it's very valuable. Especially, I think the book, you can feel it has been written by a practitioner who understands, in my opinion, the challenges a bit more, rather than other books that have been written in an office by someone who has done research. So I think it's a very valuable resource.
Oh, that's kind of you to say. Thanks for saying that, mate.
Do you want to nominate someone to be interviewed?
Well, I'll tell you what, there's some incredible people out there. And if I started a list, I'm going to leave somebody out. You probably won't. Lachlan Penfold at the Melbourne Storm. Dean Benton at the Australian Rugby Union. Suki Hobson at the Milwaukee Bucks. Scotty Dickinson at Australian Swimming. Oh, and it goes on and on and on. Each one of those I've had the honor of working with when they were young, and they've everything I've answered you today, and what they have taken all those things on board, and they've arrived where they are now, in really good shape. Each one of them has had their own journey, which have had difficulties to it. They've suffered disappointments. They've made their mistakes along the way, and I just watch them learn and move towards, and some of their interpretations are not pseudoscientific. They're not shallow. They are born of experience. If you want to talk about tactical periodization, which is the new in word of it just means common sense training. But if you want to see people that have really applied this, look at Johnny Pryor and Dean Benton. You won't go far wrong. You want to look at robustness in running mechanics? Yeah, I mean, talk to Franz Bosse. I was talking to Franz just last week, was in Australia. But if you look at the practitioner that has talk to Johnny Pryor. All the fads and your things that going on, somewhere out there are people that are delivering them really, really well. And those are some names that if and they are the, be frank with you, they're the best generalists you'll come across. Now, they might be able to talk to you about some distinct, specific stuff. I've mentioned rehabilitation. You want to recover from a hamstring or an ACL? Bill Knowles, Suki Hobson. There you go. That the best of the best. You want to talk about some of the swimming development stuff from an athletic development point of view? Scotty Dickinson. You want to talk about running a firestorm of a department when you're under so much pressure to win things? Talk to Jeremy Hickmans, who used to be with the Broncos. I mean, each one of these people will give you wonderful generalist remarks, but also be able to drill some depth in an area that you might have as a topic. And each one of those topics, so they're great generalists. But can I just say one thing about each one of them? They're great people to start with. I mean, some of the crew down at the LTA at Roehampton, and some of them have moved on and some of them have stayed there. One of the things that glues these people together is something that we spoke about right at the beginning. They've got a presence of being good people. They don't have egos. They're not trying to sell you something. They're not a guru, or they're not spells and potions and gadgets and all. And there's plenty of that out there. These are good, solid people to start with. And when we spoke about how do you appoint these people, this is what you've got to be, I think. You've got to be a good, wholesome person that can make a mistake, can learn from it, and create harmony with people around you. And every one of those people I've mentioned, and there's another 24 of them. Ollie Richardson across working with Huddersfield Rugby League Club at the moment. What stuff that Ollie's doing down there. Kev Mannion down at Gloucester Rugby Union, and what he's doing with that development squad in terms of athletic development. Boy, get hold of him, some of the stuff he's doing. You want to talk about physical education in primary schools? Talk to Steve Merland and Greg Thompson, because they are the best in the world. Every one of those is a good person, have got presence, and can teach and coach. That's it. That's all you need.
Cool. What's going on in Kelvin Giles' life at this moment in time?
I'm making less mistakes, and I'm enjoying being a volunteer coach, and I'm working with 12-year-olds. And it is the biggest. I used to work with 12-year-olds as a PE teacher 50 years ago, but now I have to think so carefully every single day. I've got a 12-year-old going towards swimming championships now, and she's also a person that came third in the country in 200-meter sprinting last year. She's a generalist. She's a multi-sport person. She's growing. She's growing very tall, and she started high school. She's got social pressures. She's got parents that wanted to be a non-specialist, and yet we have fixture lists out there for her. We have qualifying standards for her. So she's going through growth and development at a huge rate of change. All these things are things that I preach about to young people, but I'm now going to have to make decisions about it. And I made one mistake with her when I didn't manage the load with her, where she set these wonderful standards, and then because I didn't give her enough time to recover. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to learn to be a good teacher and learn to be a good coach now, because if you think you're good, you go and coach a 12-year-old. Seriously. If you want to go and hone your skills, come out of your Olympic champion area. I know it's Olympic year with Tokyo. You go out and see if you can coach a 12-year-old. That's a true test for you. And it's finding me out, I'm telling you. But she's loving every minute, and I'm loving every minute, which I think is the bottom line. That's what I'm doing.
Really cool. You have been very generous with your time. I thank you for your enthusiasm and sharing your wealth of experience. Where can people find you?
Pardon?
Where can people find you?
I've got World Wide Web movementdynamics.com, and I try and write a lot of blogs on there as well. And that's my way of communicating. And I put the blogs on there, and then I also send the blogs onto the UK Coaching Centre, and I try and share on that as well. I try and share the blogs on that thing called LinkedIn. It sounds like I know what I'm doing, but So, yeah, I mean, I've got kbgiles@gmail.com is my email address. And then you can get through to me on World Wide Web movementdynamics.com and read some of the blogs. And I always try and answer everybody's email if I can. And I'll get busy at times, but I learn from everybody that communicates with me. So I want to keep on learning.
Kelvin, thanks so much for your time.
That's all right, mate. Thanks very much for getting in touch. I do appreciate it. Thanks, mate.
You.
Bye.